that our political system had fallen victim to the hands of the corrupt few who had no interest of achieving the ultimate aim of a generations of anti-colonial struggles, namely the return of the land and mineral wealth of African people. We are a movement that was formed on the objective analysis of the conditions that confront our people, which was and remains increasingly the levels of poverty, continued inhuman living conditions which perpetuate apartheid, racist spatial planning, landlessness, joblessness, racial inequality, and massive exclusion of Africans from the economy and the means of production. Our existence remains a response to the lack of respect to the African child faces here in South Africa, in the continent and the diaspora. We are a response to the criminalization of the black skin and the permanent war which has been waged on the black people by those who have always been our historical enemies. Perhaps most painfully, our movement was formed as a necessary resistance after the painful realization that the former liberation movement had indeed become a weapon in the hands of white monopoly capital and a weapon whose target was black and poor people. The birth of the EFF came immediately when the first drop of blood of Mgcineni Mambush Noki fell at the Kopi and turned the soil at Marikana into a bloodbath. As those bullets hit the flesh of 34 mine workers, our ancestors who had died bitterly in the hands of colonialists demanded that the EFF be formed to be the shield of our people against those who had murdered them and were now murdering their own children. As the defiant miners at Marikana were executed across the mountain at Marikana, with weapons being planted by their side to create an impression that they were a threat, a giant was being woken up. It is this giant that is reaching a decade of existence today. We were born out of the blood of Marikana, not only to avenge our people, but to ensure that such devastating tragedy never happens again. We were formed as an answer to the cries of widows of Marikana who buried their husbands, sons and brothers, not knowing why they were executed without mercy. The EFF and the Marikana massacre can never be separated because it was those mine workers, those widows, and those fatherless children who, with tears in their eyes, demanded the birth of this movement. It was the blood that was soaked into the soil of Marikana that demanded the formation of this movement. As we sit here today, we mark 10 years of answering to those cries. We lead in various structures, in various municipalities, legislatures, and parliament with a mandate from Marikana. We call each other commissars not for self-gratification, but because we bear the responsibility of healing a broken society. Fellow fighters, the responsibility upon our shoulders is as old as the struggle against colonial conquest itself. I say this not to intimidate you, but to help you appreciate the responsibility you have so that you never take it for granted. You must never take it for granted that our people find hope in the red beret and the red t-shirt of the EFF. You must never underestimate that our people are intelligent enough to know that we are the true custodian of their history to lead them into the future. The moment you take for granted the historical task that has been given to us is when we'll betray the past and fail the future. The moment you regard your responsibility as a burden and you conduct your work not out of service to the revolution, but out of compliance, is when you must know that you have taken the calling of leading the EFF for granted. You must know where we come from. You must know why the EFF exists. Otherwise, you will make your revolutionary duty as a job obligation, and as a result, nothing you do will be inspired by the ideals of liberation and love for the people. One of the most revolutionary responsibilities we have as leaders of the EFF is to have an undying love for our people. This is because you will never make a sacrifice for a cause you do not love and for a people you do not love. You will never sacrifice time away from your family if you resent the work that comes with liberating African people. And that work comes with being amongst Africans. If you do not love our people, you will resent deployment because deployment takes you away from those you find comfort with and takes you to the trenches where our people are suffering. You must love our people if you have any intention of liberating them. There is no liberation without love. And this task is so difficult because it requires you to love a hated people. Black people are hated and have been programmed to hate themselves. To love a black person is such a revolutionary exercise because it requires of you to love that which is socially, economically, politically dead and defeated. Black people are hated all over the world, discriminated against all over the world, and are described as the moral problem in society. We are a people so difficult to love because it means loving a defeated being. Our task as revolutionaries is therefore to show love to black people and show them that they remain a possibility of victory and life, even though the world designed to defeat and dehumanize them. One of the first responsibilities we continue to bear, therefore, is to be present and lead the struggle of our people. The presence requires a deliberate effort to conscientize black people and make them realize their own humanity. We have a responsibility to show black people that their humanity cannot coexist with poverty, helplessness, and humiliation, and to show them that their conditions are not normal. It is through consciousness that will liberate them and show them the path to economic freedom. This, however, cannot be achieved without the vanguard movement such as the EFF. It is critical that we build a 10 years that we have achieved in existence. The foundation has been laid. Our duty is not to become complacent. Going into the next 10 years of struggle for economic freedom of African people, we must revisit our founding ideas, our purpose and our objectives, and prepare ourselves to govern. We must revisit the core principles so that we do not forget who we are and why we exist. This is important, comrade, because we are set to become a new generation of politics, not only in South Africa, but in the continent. We are set with the task of breaking the curse of post-colonial liberation movement, who become consumed with self-interest and corruption and have no ability to lead our people into promised land of independence and prosperity. The EFF is an opportunity for all African people to truly achieve liberation. We are an opportunity to build a thriving African continent that participates in the world on equal footing and not as a stepchild of the imperialists. All of you, therefore, as objectively the best which the EFF has to offer in terms of leadership and capacity, must know that you are in service of the millions of Africans who came before us and fought for our dignity and freedom. You are servants of the slain in Marikana. You are the descendants of those who were massacred in the wars of dispossession, and you carry the inheritance of fighting for the return of the land. We must, fellow fighters and commissars, begin at the beginning and remember who we are, so that the last 10 years become a springboard to liberation and not yet another historical mistake in the quest for liberation in Africa. Commissars, one of our defining ideological features is our commitment in the ideological ideals of Frantz Fanon. There are two aspects that we must re-emphasize of Fanon, which will be critical to our election campaign and our communication to our people. The two chapters of particular significance are both in his book, The Ratchet of the Earth, and they are called The Pitfalls of National Consciousness and On Violence. The significance is in that one provides a guide on why liberation movement failed post the liberation moment, and the other provides a diagnosis on the necessity of violence. and the violence of existing in a colonial and neo-colonial society. If we want to learn from the mistake of those who came before us, Fanon is instructive because he tells us what not to do and what to become. The problem internally that we confront as Africans is the existence of liberation movements who sustain themselves on blackmail and through the use of law enforcement agencies to suppress the demands of the people for the promise of liberation. Fanon teaches us that and illustrates that the liberation movement has no potential to lead us into the future, is preoccupied with reminding our people of the past in each and every election cycle and periodically through meaningless celebration of so-called independence. It is a class of triumphalist politicians who begin to resent the masses and characterize them as people who do not appreciate the leadership of the liberation movement. For my liberation movement, therefore, begins to build a wall between itself and the masses, while impatiently accumulating petty wealth in alliance with the West.